Rhonda, in our November UFO conference that we held over at Westmoreland Community College, we had a speaker, Nick Redfern. Actually, you met him. Mm-hmm. You met him there. You were at the conference. And Nick wrote this book. I had never heard of it before, Fred. Have you ever seen this, Final Events?
I've really ever heard of it.
Yeah, Final Events. I had no idea he wrote this book because I wrote a 2012 book. And so I started reading it, and this has really changed my thinking on at least the abduction phenomenon with UFOs. So let me put this here so they can see the cover of the book. And I want to tell you, in the January issue of the MUFON Journal, they talk about Nick Redfern. This January issue was one of the best ones that they put out. We've referred to this one issue 3 or 4 times now. But in this issue, here's a quote from Nick Redfern talking about his book. He wrote it in 2010, Final Events. I spoke with a variety of government insiders who firmly believe the aliens are literal demons and that the entire abduction experience is an illusion, a hologram to convince us we are dealing with extraterrestrials, thus allowing the minions of Satan to get their claws into us. I had never looked at it that way. So what I did was I read his book. And you know, I've had some paranormal activity for years. Right. And I brought Rhonda actually over, and we'll talk about this in a different episode, to cleanse my house because of what's going on there in the house. So this really got my attention. So let me give you an overview of what is the Collins Elite, what is this book talking about. And as it turns out, Nick Redfern is contacted by the MUFON Nebraska State Director, Ray Bosch, right? Ray tells him, I've got all this material. They contacted Ray because Ray's a reverend, okay? So, but he's also a MUFON State Director. Right. So he contacts Nick because he wants to get this information out. So that's really where it came from. Ray gives the information to Nick Redfern now to start the investigative part of this, to find out if this is real or not. So I made myself some notes, and the way this whole storyline unfolds is in 1918. Have you ever heard of Aleister Crowley? Right. He's the guy you see like in the TV show Supernatural. Right. Aleister is one of the characters.
He's related to the Bushes.
No, he's a self-proclaimed devil worshiper, Aleister Crowley. And what happens in 1918 is he's doing his stuff, and he conjures up an elemental, which is a creature, you know, a creature. He conjures one up by the name of Lam, L-A-M. Now, it looks just like this guy, except it's got small eyes, actually small beady eyes. It doesn't have the large eyes. That, and there's a picture of it out there, that was the first time you had the gray alien ever. You didn't have it prior to that. So it shows up with this Aleister Crowley, who's a demonologist, Satanist, whatever, and so he conjures this up. So what happens, though, in 1942, the FBI gets involved in investigating Aleister Crowley for satanic rituals, all of that. So Crowley becomes friends with, get this, Jack Parsons, who I never heard of, right? Ray Bradbury. Right. The guy who wrote all those stories, great sci-fi writer, and L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology. Right. L. Ron Hubbard and Ray Bradbury were students of Aleister Crowley studying demonology. So what happens is Parsons basically takes over for Crowley. He becomes the self-proclaimed Antichrist, really bigger than Crowley at that time. He conjures up now a female entity, okay? So then, now the FBI is investigating them on all this stuff that they're doing, and then what happens is he is doing some sort of magical ritual ceremony with chemicals and different stuff, and he there's an explosion in his basement, in his lab. When I read about it, completely blew the guy apart. He wasn't dead. Blew his jaw off, blew an eye out. Jack Parsons. Okay. Blew him apart. Arm, just like he died at the hospital. He was alive at the scene. They took him to the hospital. I mean, he was, it was horrible, right? So So what they're saying is that Aleister Crowley opened a portal in 1918 when he brought Lamb through.
Okay.
And Parsons widened it in 1942 when he brought his female entity through. That's what started part of this whole UFO phenomenon, the modern era. Not the older stuff, the ancient aliens, not stuff that goes back to the 1800s that we've talked about. So it started with these demonologists doing this stuff. So, so what they're saying, basically in 1947, this resulted in demonic entities disguised as aliens, showing us UFOs. That's what Kenneth Arnold saw. That's what was seen in Roswell. So the FBI is monitoring this Parsons guy because they know the Russians are involved in mind control, MK Ultra and the mind control stuff. So they create this group. The Pentagon gets together, creates this group now called the Collins Elite. They take it over from the FBI. So now you've got a branch of the CIA called the Collins Elite that's looking into UFOs and demonic activity. And we just mentioned the MK Ultra experiments. In 1969, the CIA funds Operation Orphan. It's a project to harness demonic powers. They actually think they could get in the league with the devil, trick them, and use some of their psychic abilities and their powers as a weapon against Russia, Cuba, Iran, Iraq, whoever they need it against.
What was it called again?
It's called Operation Orphan. And I'll send you this information. Okay. It's Operation Orphan in 1969. Project Blue Book ended in 1969. Right. So now they were looking into UFOs, right? Now they get into this thing. They believe it's demonic, most of it. Right? And I don't think it is all, but some of it could fall into this as a deception. So, and then he quotes, in his book, Genesis 6, that you're familiar with, the book of Enoch, that the fallen angels sort of, the daughters of man, they mated with them and they created the Nephilim, which was their children. And the great flood was really to destroy the Nephilim, to get rid of them. That's what the flood was about, because we've interbreeded with these creatures and created soulless humans. So we got rid of them. So now get this, you're going to like this. The Collins Elite then performs an extensive investigation into military black helicopters and abductions, because we've brought this up a few times about the abductions. So, but they could find no branch of the military that's conducting these cattle mutilations and these exercises that they say are black helicopters. They conclude that the UFO abduction phenomenon was nothing more than hallucinations generated by the fallen angels to trick humans into believing that ETs are here on Earth to help, and that there was no reason to believe in God, because they were here to help us cure diseases, clean up the environment, keep us from having nuclear, wars and all of that. They believe that UFO crashes are staged, and that, like Roswell, and that the passengers, like the aliens that are found, these little aliens right here, the aliens that are found are actually creations of the Nephilim, where they've engineered these people, almost like cloning or genetic engineering of them.
They say the Greys in that is more robot than...
yeah, they could be androids. They could be half alive, half mechanical. So they're saying that, like the whole Roswell crash and the creatures, that they created the ship, but it's all part of a plan to trick us to think that these fly from outer space to get here. So, and they said the real goal is to trick us into handing our souls over. So, but then I know about the MUFON state section director in Florida, Joe Jordan, a few years ago. He's looking into, and this is in the book also, this is in Nick's book, he started investigating abductions. And I remember reading this years ago. There were a couple of cases where the person called out to Jesus to help, and the abduction stopped. So now he's saying, wait a second, if this is an ET, a gray ET, Why do they back off when the person, the victim, calls out to Jesus? That doesn't make any sense. So, and we've talked about this, when you put alien abduction, the 10 most points, and then you put demonic activity, what are the 10 most frequent? They're the same. We've talked about that. They're the same.
You're talking about that. I got a case right now up in Cameron County, and it's one of them where she's talking to aliens, and she's saying the exact same thing you're saying. She says she's dying, and the aliens are there to take her soul.
Well,
she said they're one and the same.
I've read this. Whitley Strieber said the same thing.
Yeah.
This is about harvesting souls.
Right, that's what she said.
Yeah, we have a soul, they don't. These entities are spiritual, whatever, and they're trying to get our soul.
Right.
So, but here's the thing. Joe Jordan does his investigation. He finds 400 cases where alien abductions and Jesus is said, and it stops. So I think he's written a book. We're going to have him come and speak at one of our, I contacted him on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, one of those. And he says, yeah, if I bring him up from Florida, he'll speak at our
he's
conference.
Back again now? Because he was over in China or somewhere.
Well, yeah, he's back. He said he will speak at our conference. I asked him if he's still doing presentations. He said, yeah. But here's a guy, he's looked into it. He says they're exactly the same. He says they're seducing us with advanced technology, promising to help us with the environment, diseases, etc. And in reality, they're tricking us, and they want our souls. Our souls is what they want. And see this out. You got me thinking about this on our first or second episode when you made the comment, and I think it was with Doc Medich. You said, I don't understand. If they're here to get samples, why does it take 1,000 years?
Right.
Remember you said that?
Right.
That got me thinking. That's what got me into this, to say, you're right. How many samples do you need? If technically, if we take your sample and they're this advanced, they can clone it.
Right.
One sample is enough to clone and have all you need. How do you take samples for hundreds of years, maybe even 2,000 or 3,000 years? They're still doing the same thing. It doesn't make any sense. How can it be alien?
That would make a lot of sense too, because there's a lot of hovering, UFOs actually hovering over graveyards and that. Like, what are they doing there?
See, when psychologists say that this is in your mind, but they make you want to sound like you're crazy, you need medication and all of that, that's not what it is. It's telepathic.
Right.
Think about how many cases have you seen where 3 people are together? She looks up and says, look at that. I see a UFO. We look up, we don't see a damn thing. We don't see anything.
I see a lot of them.
Well, I'm just saying. But that happens. You know why? Because that's a telepathic
to her, right.
projection into her mind. Well, she sees it, we don't. That explains why not everybody can see it. Why when they go to take their camera, it's not on the film.
Right.
I mean, we just figured all of that out. The people have been saying, how is that possible?
But there's a lot of times you take the picture, and there's nothing there and it is on film.
Right, in a different wavelength, you mean?
Yeah, we look at it as she has an ability to able to see this, whereas we don't.
Right.
There are certain people that can see it, like same thing with Bigfoot. There's people that can't see it and people that can. You have 3 people like that, and one sees Bigfoot and the other 2 don't.
Or is it projected in your mind telepathically?
That could be too.
See, that's the whole part that I never looked into that. So, I read a couple other books, and even Nick mentions this Michael S. Heiser, who's written a lot of books on the Bible and UFOs, in that area. He says the abductions is a human rights issue, it's unethical, and it's demonic. Guy Malone, another big UFO investigator, you might know him from Florida. I contacted him too.
I never heard of him.
Yeah, Guy Malone. You can find him on YouTube. He gives some really good lectures on UFOs. He got to the point, kind of like where I am now, where he's starting to question what are we seeing and what are we being told. He actually believed the same storyline, that this stuff is demonic that's going on. This is actually the devil and fallen angels tricking us. He's actually dropped out of the UFO field. He doesn't do this anymore. I got to see if I can get Guy Malone to come up and speak for us. I think he will. He wrote a book called Come Sail Away. It shows the Columbus on one of his ships, the Nina Pinta Santa Maria, one of them, whichever one he was on, and an ET face in the background. And then there's a little quote there. I'm telling you, he's saying that a lot of this stuff is actually demonic. But so he says that they're not; these are not benevolent. They're fallen angels. And he says that the fallen angels and the globalists are working together right now. Like people talk about the Illuminati and all of that.
Right, yeah, I agree with that.
So here's his quote. He says they're working together to bring about a one world government, which will be the work of the Antichrist. One government, one leader, one economy, one religion, and it's all a UFO deception to steal our souls. The UFOs, when they show up, will be the deception.
Right.
It makes perfect sense to me, because what does the Bible say when everybody turns against their faith and they pull away from Catholicism and religion? An event has to take place.
It's apostasy.
Yeah. So something is going to take place.
And we're in the great apostasy now.
Yeah.
Meaning people are turning away. They're turning away in a variety of ways. And following UFOs and aliens is just one of the ways that they're turning away from God.
Yeah.
And believing that the UFOs created us, when indeed they did not.
When you get Erich von Daniken on Ancient Aliens, I did the conference with him in 2012 in Minnesota, the first Ancient Alien Conference. When I brought up Jesus and UFOs, he threw a fit that Jesus was just a man. He was not the Son of God. You had to see the fit. He actually, after dinner, when we came back up for the speaker panel, he says, let me clarify what I said. Somebody must have said something to him. You came across as the biggest atheist going, you know, that Jesus don't exist. Because he, even though he says he doesn't want a religion to come of the ancient alien theory, that's what it is. Just like you said, people looking to them rather than looking to the Bible and Jesus. So that's, you know, really where this book, and it falls in line with a lot of the way I've been thinking with the stuff that that doesn't add up. So get this, now in the book, it says that, well, Christ's return is not something to be feared, but to be welcomed. The CIA sponsors the Collins elite because eschatology, which is the end times.
Study of the end times.
Right.
Okay, and biblical prophecies are a national security issue. Wouldn't they be? If you got to the end of days and the Antichrist, that's a national security issue.
Right,
What are you going to do if you get this leader that takes charge? And you know, you've seen all the movies Left Behind, all the others.
But you know,
that is a national security issue.
What you're talking about there, if you remember the show Millennium,
Yeah,
that's exactly
vaguely.
that's exactly what you're saying.
And V, I mean, they never finished V. I never saw the end as to what the goal was, but that's it.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing.
I mean, it really makes you wonder with this now. And they say, get this line too. They focus on trying to convince the military and the public that the only way to save your soul is to follow Christianity. They even, and they pulled this from the military. At one point, the military people, they had psalms and stuff, and they had pendants, you know, St. Michael, all this. They were trying to convince the military branch, you have to believe in Jesus to fight this, because it's a spiritual battle, right?
Yes, it is. Spiritual battle.
Yeah. And so the Collins elite saw 9/11 as a countdown to the end. And there were also discussions of faking a religious event, like with UFOs, some sort of religious thing. They talked about hologramming and putting the face of Jesus up in the sky over Iraq and Iran, you know, and during starting a war, and things to trick people. But then they, you know what they said about that? They said, well, trying to expose one deception might actually fulfill the ancient prophecies and usher in the Antichrist. They were afraid of this. So that, you know, and then I, you know, I'm looking at it and I said, you know, I saw a special on HBO about Scientology, and they had Tom Cruise and John Travolta. And I said to myself, well, did they realize that L. Ron Hubbard, he got started with these demonic Satan worship is the start of Scientology. So that's what his book's about. You know, I found it really interesting. He even made the quote. Here's something else, because you want to talk about cattle mutilations and helicopters. Nick Redfern says that he believes there's even though the Collins elite couldn't find this branch of the military with the black helicopters, Nick Redfern says that there's a U.S. military group known as the Night Stalkers. Have you ever heard that, the Night Stalkers?
No.
I'm finding out a lot of stuff. It's a group called the Night Stalkers, who I think might be paramilitary, not military.
Yeah.
Then you can't find out who they are. They're not in the budget or anything.
Right.
They're behind the cattle mutilation phenomenon. It's a way to appease occult-based entities, which is why they're taking the cattle and doing the mutilations. It's all ritual sacrifice. The blood and organs are utilized in ancient sacrificial appeasement rites to incredibly old deities. And we get something in return. It's a supernatural power that can be weaponized. That's what the CIA, and it makes perfect sense that the CIA would try that.
Well, you look at the cattle mutilations. I mean, every one of the cows or cattle don't have blood in it when it comes back. I mean, they take the blood. Every drop of blood's coming out of it.
We'll talk about cattle mutilations next.
Okay.
What do you think about this Collins elite? The fact that we know that the CIA was involved in MK Ultra, right?
Right. They started it.
Remote viewing. The Russians were doing it first. Do you think that we would then say, well, we looked at the UFOs, you know, it could be...
Well, you notice, okay, when you talk about remote viewing, they never see nothing really bad with the UFOs either. The Russians never see nothing bad with the UFOs. They're all saying that the UFOs aren't here to harm us. So they must know something that we don't. I mean, and I think that's very, you know...
It seems like in this field, the more you learn about it, the less you know.
Right.
It confuses everything. Every time I think I got this thing figured out, another angle comes up like this now. And because I've had this paranormal activity, I said, you know what? What if this is a big deception? And when you look at the Bible, maybe that is the correct story of how things are going to go down.
You look at it, John, you're talking about the government. It says, today, 2 official U.S. government investigations have delved into the cattle mutilation phenomena. Although some argue that they barely scratched the surface of the problem with their cursory look at a few cases. The FBI submitted their investigation beginning May of 1979 and carried out under submission of Agent Kenneth Romel's final report called Operation Animal Mutilation, June 1980. His report was an effort to debunk cattle mutilation and focus on the 1979 cases, while simultaneously offering no explanation for what was happening. There's no reason for continued law enforcement. But the interesting thing is, prior to his investigation, the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, conducted an independent look at the phenomena, coming to the same conclusion, although they did suggest further investigation was necessary.
Yeah.
So why would ATF be investigating this? I mean, I can see Rommel because of the people out, I think it was in Arizona, New Mexico. The congressman wanted them to do it.
Yeah, the congressman asked for it.
Right.
ATF shouldn't be in the middle of this. What jurisdiction is the ATF
The ATF actually done it before the FBI did it. So why were they in it? I mean, you know, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
They'll always tell you after they get involved, there's nothing to worry about, there's nothing to look into, and then there'll be a covert branch that's looking into it.
Right.
But nothing in the public view. And that's not what this country is about. You don't do things covertly. You do things out in the open. That's what the government and how it's supposed to be conducted in this country. You know, and there was that great speech by Kennedy that we showed on episode 2 or 3, whichever it was, about not covering things up, not going after whistleblowers and doing things out in the open so you don't have to lie later because you told the truth.
Well, but I think, again, the government lies about everything. You know that.
Unfortunately, it appears everything is spun, which is a lie. Spinning is a lie.
Right. But, you know, even back in 35, okay, Project Sigma received the following account. I don't remember the exact date, but it was in 1934 or 35, soon after I went to Missouri to live with my grandparents. We found a hog slaughtered in a mysterious way in a pasture after we had seen a shiny object flying over the farm. Tree level. This was back in 1934. So they've been doing this for how long now, but nobody ever really paid any attention to it or said anything about it.
Yeah.
So, and like you say, the helicopters, I mean, you know, it's like you say, are they really helicopters? Or are they actually something else? That they're there to look like helicopters, but they're not really helicopters.
They're paramilitary, right? But then after we talked about this on one of our early episodes on this show, I was saying to myself, what if the helicopters are Trojan horses.
Right.
They're constructed by the aliens.
Right, to look like helicopters.
Yeah, so you see a black helicopter, there's no markings,
Right.
okay, but it's a helicopter. So what? Okay, it's a helicopter, it's a plane, it's a bird.
Right,
You know,
right.
it's them that's running it. They're piloting it. I can't see
Right.
the pilot.
No.
I see a helicopter, so it's no big deal. It's like having a car. I see a car, you know, but who's driving it? That was my one thought.
But almost every cattle mutilation you have, there's black helicopters fly around there.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're saying is the military is actually watching everything ET is doing.
Aiding them.
Right.
Yeah, and there's more to it. Let me just, before we go into the cattle mutilations, I want to ask you about the devil. And, I've read a lot where people think that Satan has the same powers as God, but he doesn't, right?
No.
No. Good.
Satan cannot even come close to the power that God has. If you ever have experiences, and of course von Daniken did not, that's
Right.
why he doesn't believe, but many people have had experiences with God and the devil, you can plainly know immediately that God can destroy everything in a matter of a nanosecond. And he's allowing all this to go on. So, if anything horrible comes into your presence, you will know you are terribly afraid. You must call on Jesus and God immediately.
But Ron,
there was
Immediately.
Yeah.
Because the devil is stronger than us.
Okay.
Than us, but not.
Yeah, but we have God in us. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. So the Lord has given us the Holy Spirit to conquer him. But we still need to call on help immediately.
Okay, but why would God let this go on? I mean, this is interesting. I mean, why does he let everything go on like it does? I mean, it's like...
I have a theory. I have a theory for that.
I mean, it's like right now. I mean, we're talking
That's the
about God
question we all
and
ask.
religion here.
Right.
They're saying
How
right
much
now,
longer?
yeah, the Pope is going to come out in the next couple of days and say there's aliens, okay?
Right.
Now, if you look at the Pope and his boys out there, they got the telescope out there called the
Right.
Lucifer Project,
Right.
Right.
Oh,
okay? It's the Lucifer Project is
And-
what they call it.
yes.
And when they asked one of the astronomers out there, they says, what are you looking for? He says, we're not looking for anything. We're waiting for them to come.
Meaning the ET.
The ETs.
I'm telling you, this
So,
is,
you know,
with what you just said,
right.
it's going to be the greatest deception in humanity.
Yes. Right.
They're going to show up. There might be some sort of cataclysm.
Right.
Like I'm afraid of that supervolcano.
Right,
Now just
yeah.
think about it. It blows. Now we're stuck.
Right.
Acid rain's coming down.
Right.
The seas are dying. You can't grow any crops. You can't feed the cattle. We don't have enough food for 7 billion people.
Right.
They show up. The Vatican announces the telescope in Tucson, they won't tell you it's the Lucifer Project,
Right.
sees they're here. They identify themselves and they say, we're here to help you and we can clean up your environment. Oh, tell us about your religion, right?
Right.
So now everybody follows.
Right.
It falls perfectly in line as a
And
deception.
allegedly, one of the other things, that's why the last Pope quit. He wasn't in to what's going on. So that's why he bowed out, and now this Pope came in, and he's all part of the scene.
Well, he said he wasn't strong enough for what was coming.
Yeah.
But the last Pope was Father Ratzinger, his real name.
Cardinal Ratzinger.
Ratzinger, yeah. And he was involved with Fatima. So he knows the third prophecy.
Right.
He just was too old to deal with it.
Right.
That was the problem. So,
It's going to be interesting. I mean, we got another 2 days. Today's the third. It's supposed to be the 5th when he makes his decision or he makes his speech. But cattle mutilation, I mean, it's been going on for quite some time. I mean, they say that actually there's between 10,000 to 200,000 cattle died since 1967.
yeah.
That's a lot of cattle. A lot of the farmers today, they don't even, the cattle's dead, they just forget about it. They don't even call nobody no more. We have the cattle mutilation unit within MUFON now. Chuck, how do you pronounce his last name?
Zukowski.
Zukowski. Used to be the police officer. He was a deputy sheriff, and he was saying that the cattle mutilation was being done by the aliens, and they fired him for it. So, I mean, there's a lot to it. I mean, you know, and then you get into the cattle mutilation, you get into the human mutilation. Is there any
Connection.
connection to it? I mean, so here we are. But like I say, here in Pennsylvania, okay, this is interesting.
But you know, I think we're going to have to come back to cattle mutilations. I think we're out of time. So, but you asked when was the first. We're going to do cattle. We'll have to do cattle on another episode because we're about out of time. But again, I go back to the first instance of human mutilation was Whitechapel, 1888. They never caught Jack the Ripper. Everything he did falls in line with cattle mutilation. So that's our episode. You'll be back, and we got to get into cattle mutilations. We never got to it. So thanks for being on today.